interested in the content. Awesome, thank you. So anyway, you hear or see a term and your gut tells you like, there's something here worth pursuing. And then you start to read about it a little bit more, and it makes sense as something you've been thinking about but couldn't quite put your finger on. And it kind of like you just think, yes, this describes what I've been like thinking about. And I feel like I've had that experience with these terms: network analysis, network theory, network leadership, and network science, right? And I want to credit actually Stephanie Boltema, who's with the Public Health Institute Lab, for kind of getting me interested in social network analysis. And those terms might sound a little wonky to some, but the more I read, the more it resonates on so many fronts for our ACH, because I think that fundamentally network leadership and network stewardship is totally in line with the work of ACHs. We haven't really talked about it this way, but I think it's a good descriptor. And this work of convening partners and increasing cross-sector collaborations, as you all know, is like super messy. There's lots of relationships, lots of partners, lots of networks. I like to say that the ACH is a network of networks. And I know we could be more strategic on this front. So the reason we invited all of you today is because we know that you're also building networks in your own communities. You are network stewards and you're part of our network of networks. And at the very least, I think many of you will find today's information interesting, but hopefully you'll also find it really relevant to your work. So what's all this network stuff all about? That's why we have Danielle and Kelly here. They're from Visible Networks Lab. And honestly, I don't remember how I landed on your website, Kelly and Danielle. Curiosity gets the better of me sometimes, and I just follow some crumb trail. And then Linda was asking me like, how did I know about this? I honestly cannot remember. But when I saw that Stephanie had done a webinar with you all, that was really validating, because I'm going to be really honest, I was also wondering how legit you were. And there's a lot of vendors and consultants in this space of cross-sector collaborations, and sometimes they try to sell us things that are not always as helpful as they seem, right? But I got a different sense when I went to your website, which is why I reached out to learn more. So I think I'll end there. And what will we get out of today? I'm not sure, but I'm curious, and I invite you all to have that same spirit, right? Not sure, but curious. And let's do a little round of intros so we all know who's in the Zoom room. And then in the chat, I'll just plug in a couple prompts to help you think about, in addition to your name and organization, maybe also describe how you think of yourself in this network space. I'm going to put those in the chat right now. If some of you are on the phone and not able to see the chat, I'll quickly read them. How are you taking responsibility for working with others to create conditions that all people need to thrive? Or how are you facilitating cross-sector collaboration and alignment? So I'll just let anybody step up to the plate right now. Who wants to go? Let's popcorn it. And don't forget your name and org.
Hi, I'm Wendy Bresney. I'm with the North Central ACH. I'll get us kicked off. I'm the Whole Person Care Collaborative Manager. And so, as most of you guys know, and so we do, of course, it's leading a collaborative, and it's 15 different organizations, but it's multiple people. And so trying to find that right balance of connecting people. You have those individuals who like these big groups, you have some that like the smaller groups, and others that just like one-on-one or not meeting at all. And so how do you make the most of getting together and making it the best use of everyone's time so that it's valuable and not just another meeting?
And maybe you can pass it off to somebody else, Wendy. Everyone passes the baton so we don't get stalled in silence.
All right, I'm looking for someone who's not on camera because it's easy to always pick the ones on camera. So I'm going to choose Nicole.
I'm gonna put myself on camera. All right. Hi, I'm Nicole Willis. I'm actually with the North Sound ACH, and the North Central team. I think we've called ourselves sister organization or kindred ACHs, and so just really delighted to be invited. If I had to kind of answer some of these questions, we are really leaning into, I think, our responsibility to learn about what the needs are to thrive. So we've been relying on some research around vital conditions and well-being measures to help us kind of as a team understand that. So that's one thing we're doing. Facilitating cross-sector collaboration and alignment. We're helping quite a bit with some COVID response and vaccine efforts and ongoing testing, and bringing schools, EMS, health departments together just to continue to help those who have access issues for any COVID vaccine and things like that. So that's what I'm up to. I'll pass it on to Alicia.
Hi everyone, I'm Alicia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also with North Sound ACH. And I feel like, thinking about how we can take responsibility to create conditions for people to thrive. I think it's about, for me, just pushing myself to be creative, to try and find where are those areas where two different organizations from very different sectors do have some common goals and places to learn from each other, and how can I learn from them and also facilitate those connections to, have some momentum to move forward on some really sticky or challenging issues. And, lately at North Sound, we've been talking a lot about rural behavioral health. And so we've been talking to schools, we've been talking about folks working in COVID, we've been talking to youth and youth serving organizations. We've been talking to CHW groups, like just a really broad mix, community paramedicine, and just trying to figure out what are all the different ways that we can tie our institutions together around some common goals. So that's how I think of it. I'm going to pass it on to Kelsey.
Hi, Kelsey Gust with Action Health Partners. There are 3 different aspects that I help bring cross-sector collaboration. So the first one, Schland Douglas Chai. There's usually around 20 different sectors that join the meetings, and we work together to see if what types of gaps are happening in our community, and I just help facilitate the conversations, and usually we end up going into breakout rooms to be able to work even closer together. Also, the interagency networking meetings I facilitate, which it is Schland Douglas Partners, and it just is a forum to boost our cross-sector networking. And then also the Moses Lake Community Resource Forum, which those are the Grant County partners, and again, to enhance the cross-sector networking that is happening in that county. And so all around, all 3 of them, I just kind of help facilitate with the connections and help keep our region and the different counties more connected. And I will pick Michelle.
Thank you, Kelsey. So my name is Michelle Sandoval. I am here with 2 hats on today, maybe 3 hats, maybe 4 hats, maybe 5 hats, however you want to talk about hats. In terms of responsibility, I think one of the ways where I would say, taking direct responsibility over creating conditions. Spent a long time in working on the outside, just kind of solutionsing things for people directly. And then, and also spent some time kind of thinking about bigger level things, but not solutionsing for people directly. And where I have found that my responsibility lies is right in the middle, being very aware of the direct things that I need to take responsibility for my community, but also realizing that we are a community and everybody needs to take responsibility for this, because it can't just be one person, one entity, one organization. And so that kind of follows over to the facilitating part. And so I have taken on a role to facilitate those conversations, and also to really encourage and facilitate other people to take on those that community responsibility as well. So I do that with my nonprofit youth serving organization hat, and then I also do that with my Coalition for Health Improvement hat in Okanagan County. Oops, and I will hand it to Edgar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edgar Salamanca. I'm here with Communities and Schools of North Central Washington. And we partner with schools, districts, and implementing a site coordinator that then connects and creates relationships with the students in finding their needs and kind of barriers that they're currently facing. And then we turn around and try to collaborate with different agencies or support groups in the community to then offer and fill in those gaps and needs for those students. So I will call on, let's see here, John.
Afternoon, I'm John Chapman. I'm the Deputy Director for North Central Accountable Community of Health. And I am taking responsibility for working to help create People Thrive, but really predominantly I feel like our role is working with partners to help identify like key needs in their areas and coming up with specific ways we can help address and solve some of those. You know, our group, the prime example, well, I'm going to save Joey's for Joey. And really part of that is really sharing key things we find. You know, EMS, we found, you know, a lot of success during COVID that really exemplified community peer medicine. And so one thing that we can do is spread that across the region and also explain to partners why it's important. And then, you know, we act as a neutral convener. So another thing we can do is kind of create a space for some of those tough conversations to push other partners to understand where the value is to improve health, and apply a little bit of political pressure that some of our partners can't do. So really, we really act as a group and individuals who can kind of really help move and shift and encourage people to collaborate and come together to focus on things that they sometimes struggle to do alone. I'm going to pass it on to, trying to think, Michaela, have you gone yet?
No, I haven't gone yet. Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Vendiola. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am with North Sound Accountable Community of Health, and I'm in my second month in my new position as the Tribal and Community Liaison. Some of the other folks from our team have already talked about ways that we are, what is the question? Taking responsibility for working with others to create conditions. But I think that first comes, conditions to thrive. I think that first comes from the ability to listen and to listen to what the community is saying they need, as well as what partners are saying they can collaborate on or engage with. How are you facilitating cross-sector collaboration and alignment? Probably the first thing that like comes to mind that's really a specific way is using our like partner reporting. These past 2 reportings, we asked them to identify like needs that they have that our ACH could support or try to like provide technical assistance with. So, and a lot of those talk on facilitating cross-sector collaboration. So, reading those and being familiar with those partnerships. Thank you. I'll pass it to Liz Baxter.
Thanks, Michaela. So Liz Baxter, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also at North Sound, so you now will have covered the whole North Sound invite list. And Caroline, I was thinking as you were describing like finding this, it really was akin to Nicole and I finding targeted universalism back in 2017 and like how that became a piece of all the work that we've been doing. So I have like 4 things that came to mind for your questions. One is we convene to learn, not to teach anything, and it has really reshaped a lot of our convenings and partnerships. And staying grounded in targeted universalism and equity, trying to create spaces where sometimes we're really comfortable and sometimes where there's a lot of discomfort. If we're trying to build those networks and relationships, we have to be willing to step into some things that we may not be the most experienced at, but we still feel like we've got to be on that journey. And then lastly, for me, just this notion of being a shepherd. I think that folks, look at me, they look at Linda, as leaders, but so much of what I feel is my responsibility is to be on the lookout for who's not included, who doesn't feel like they're moving along at the same pace, and to leave no one behind and to try and find ways for everybody to feel like they've got some steps they can see as they step forward. So Linda, I'm going to pass to you.
So Linda Evans-Perlette, the Executive Director of North Central ACH. I am very lucky to work with Liz Baxter. The 2 of us have been appointed by our colleagues. As you know, there's 9 ACHs in the state. And Liz and I are the liaison folks that communicate every other week with the Healthcare Authority Sprint team. I would say the thing that I try to concentrate on as far as creating conditions that people can thrive is trying to be positive and look for things that are positive. It's quite frustrating for Liz and I at times, to be honest, to deal with the Healthcare Authority and the uncertainty that we continue to live with, even though we've been 5 years into this grand experiment. But on the other hand, there's a lot of positive things, and that's what we try to concentrate on. And with the positive environment to begin with, if that is your goal, it's easier for people to thrive. I will pass it on to, let's see here, Joey.
Thanks, Linda. Joseph Hunter, North Central ACH. I'm a Recovery Coach Network Coordinator. What I take responsibility for in my role is really building the Recovery Coach peer-to-peer network in our region and really highlighting resources that we utilize in that role and building community partnerships in our region as well. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, guys. I will pick on Danielle Varda.
Well, great. Actually, Carolyn, maybe I could ask you did we get everybody?
Let's do Caitlin and
Caitlin.
Diana too.
Okay, Joe, you get to introduce yourself as Joseph, but I'm passing it off right away because I'm going to do a lot
You'll
of
be the
talking
cherry
in
on
just a
top.
minute. Yeah, so I don't
All
want to
right.
talk too much, but thank you for picking me. I'm going to pass it to Caitlin.
All right. So I'm Caitlin Quirk with Action Health Partners, the Health Education Network Coordinator. Some of my responsibilities have changed over the past year, but I think all of the contracts I work on through Department of Health and other funders really focus on pushing us towards that cross-sector collaboration and building networks to kind of for our health education programs, which has kind of led me into some other networks like the NCACH board, the BHAB or the Behavioral Health Advisory Board, and working with that, Suicide Prevention Coalition and the Chelan Douglas Tri. But I think something that for taking responsibility, we actually did do a second year of the Data Across Sectors for Health mentorship program. And right now we're really focusing on cross-sector conversations and working to develop more of a shared vision in our Chelan Douglas community about bidirectional referrals and resource directories and data sharing to kind of understand how can we make these cross-sector collaborations and networks and partnerships more effective for everyone, and what needs to be done within our community to make those more efficient as we move forward. And so, yeah, I think that's where I'll leave that one, and we'll pass it over to Diana.
Thank you. So Diana Reese, I'm with Grant Integrated Services located in Moses Lake. A lot of my work is mainly focused on just behavioral health promotion. So substance use disorders and mental health. As far as specific groups I'm facilitating to build cross-sector collaboration would be like the Grant County Suicide Prevention Task Force, which does cover the whole county, and then working with specific communities like Mattawa, Quincy, Moses Lake, and now in the future with Soap Lake to expand their prevention services. I'm also involved with the Grant County CHI. For the other questions, as far as taking responsibility, I think as long as we could provide information of what's out there and what's available, and then also really inviting people to be part of the conversation genuinely, I think it really has helped really grow people so they can thrive in these conversations and networks. So I'll pass it back to Danielle now.
So is that all right, Carolyn? Should I just get started? Okay. Just wow, thank you so much for having us here, because the work you do is just amazing. And I kind of said this as I was coming into this call from another one, but there is nothing that is more exciting and motivating for us than to get to spend time with people doing the kind of work you're doing inside your communities. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about networks and a lens by which we use a concept called network science to think about a lot of the challenges and opportunities that you all just laid out. And so I will do it as a presentation, but feel free to stop me. I'm very conversational. And sometimes we do a little activity in between, but what I'm going to do is kind of halfway through, I'm just going to show you an activity that if you want, it's something you can kind of take back to your own networks and your own community. So just a little tool to take with you at the end. And the way I'm going to split this up is in the beginning, I'm going to talk a little bit about networks and network science, but then I'm just going to tell you kind of a story of how we've used that in some of our own projects in partnership with communities to get have aha moments that have moved us forward and moved the community forward. So I'll do both of those things. Let me just share my screen. There it is. And get back to the top. I always tell everyone, don't look at how many slides are there, because I just use the same slide deck a lot, and then I don't present them all. But so this presentation, I actually do it a lot. Like I get to present to a lot of community organizations, from breastfeeding coalitions, to COVID vaccines and safety and things like that. But really the concept that we're talking about is how we all are thinking like a network scientist. And I guarantee that everyone on this call is already thinking like a network scientist. So this is only to give us some language and words and thinking around that. But a lot of this is going to feel like very intuitive. I will introduce myself. I'm Danielle Varda. I'm our CEO and founder at Visible Network Labs. I'm also a professor at the University of Colorado, Denver in the School of Public Affairs, where I ran the Center on Network Science for many years. And prior to that, I was a researcher at the RAND Corporation. But we've just in partnership with the university, exited kind of the university life and took all of this work into an organization. We are a social enterprise with this mission to help people leverage this science in communities to strengthen their connections and outcomes of their work. So we do a lot of trainings and workshops, but primarily what we're doing is building technology-based data and mapping tools that we can, not for the sake of building technology or getting data, but for the sake of translating that into practice and building stronger communities and thinking about how to leverage that work. And Carolyn, since you said this, I like quickly went and put these 2 slides in to show you how legitimate we are. So we work all over the country, and we actually are all over the world right now. We have people working with us and using our tools in Ghana and Switzerland, and we're working with some folks at the university across 7 countries right now. But most of our work is in public health, but it's also been expanded to more health systems work, and also schools and even courts and recovery in the judicial system. So we've really expanded across a lot of the country. We work for a lot of foundations, but our primary source of where we learn from is inside communities. And so all of our projects help us do that work. And I wanted to mention, because a few of you mentioned these topics, but like we work on a 5-year project with the VA on suicide prevention in communities. And we've been doing a lot more work on behavioral mental health and recovery work. So, I think we're really connected on some of the ways we're working in communities. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of launch into this, which is, this might sound a little professory at the beginning, but I try really hard not to sound like I'm lecturing. So you'll see that I go through a little ways of talking about networks, but one reason that we're asked to do this work a lot is because just about every community, every organization is engaged in what we call the network way of working. This slide used to say like a new phenomenon, but now it's just a new normal. I mean, a decade later, there is almost no one who isn't required by their funder or even legislators to work across boundaries now. And what's interesting is, when most of us came to our jobs, we didn't have degrees in network science. We don't even, have training in building networks. But because we're humans, our bosses and our organizations just think networking should be obvious to us. And so, but if you're like me, who's actually quite an introvert or, not skilled necessarily in the network way of working, it's a challenge. And so we've added this new skill required to people's work lives without really giving people opportunities to really think about what it means to have that skill and how to implement it. So one of the gaps we're trying to fill is trying to figure out how to build network leadership inside, our epidemiologist workflow, and our program manager workflows. And so that's our goal, is to kind of make some sense of this and help people with some tools. I'll go through this just real quick, but as you all probably can tell, like the growth of networks has just blown up over the last few years. This is one of my favorite people, Eleanor Ostrom, who was the first female to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And, when she was talking about what you'll probably know as free riders and collective action, it was really a new way of thinking about how we work together across communities. But there was already concern, right, that like people were going to come in and not do their fair share and that kind of stuff. And networks, has just become really more adopted in communities. Collective impact came along and everybody was really excited about that. And today, really, where a lot of network thinking is around equity, distributed leadership, and how we can really make sure that people, I think it might have been Linda, and I'm so sorry if I got this wrong, was just saying, I think I just got that wrong, but making sure, I'm sure we're all doing it, that the right people are represented in our networks. But all of this craze about networks, this is the prettiest picture I can find of a network graveyard. It's is really, we've talked about this, our partners at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation one day said to us, we need help on this thinking because we are sure there is a graveyard where networks go to die. We're involved in so many networks. I'm sure all of us are involved in many networks across the community. And a lot of us are the same partners at each of them. And what's happening is a lot of people are getting really tired, and not sure where these network initiatives are going. We might not have a good way to measure them. We're not sure how to actually decrease the amount of networking, but increase the collaborative advantage that we get from them. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, because we want to keep these networks going and out of these graveyards. When I use the word network, this is actually the way that I see what I'm saying. I think of networks as these nodes and lines. And I do that because what we do at Visible Network Labs is we measure networks. We try to provide data to all this thinking that I'll talk about here. And to do that, we have to find a way to measure them. So in the networks that I'm going to talk about, these circles can be, we refer to them as nodes, and they can be anything, organizations, people. Now that we're talking a lot more about ecosystems, sometimes these are thoughts and ideas or events. And then the lines between them are the relationships. And so that's the way that we connect them and measure that. So this could be formal or informal connections, friendship ties, who we're referring clients to in a referral network, and things like that. So I kind of want to set the tone, because the stories that I'm going to tell you is how we've used this framework to really think about how to move some community networks forward. So I like to kind of start with that. The other thing that I kind of level setting is this kind of intro to what I mean when I say network science. So I want to assure you, network science is an everyday science. All of us are doing network science all the time. In fact, right now on this call, like I'm kind of trying to get to know you and you're trying to get to know me, and that's network science. We're trying to understand relationships and how they work. So all of us are really thinking like network scientists all the time. But what we commonly learn when we're building networks is that more is better. So we need more meetings and more partners and more relationships. A really unique way that network science helps us think that through is this idea that more is not always better. So it's a basic principle, and it drives everything we do at VNL, because we know that communities are totally overwhelmed already. They don't have line item budgets for network building, not very often. And so, just to communicate to a community that more networking is better is the answer is super overwhelming. So what we're trying to do is think of some concepts and alternatives to that. So I'm going to explain that here, what I mean. So just for a minute, if everyone in the call, if you look at the little orange node there that says you, and just imagine that's you, not necessarily you at work, just you at home, and who you connect to, is in what we call your strong tie network. And so these strong ties are often people that we choose to connect to because we feel close to them and we're comfortable with them. They're often people who are like us, or they think like us, or they have access to similar resources as us. We actually call it homophily. It's this term like birds of a feather flock together is homophily. And this is naturally how people form relationships. We connect with people like us. So each of us on this call are embedded in our own little sub network here of strong ties. But what's happening over time is that we start to bridge across those. So these dotted lines are considered what we call our weak ties. And so weak ties are ties that connect us across these subnetworks. And so there's a theory actually called the strength of weak ties that this sociologist, Mark Granovetter, published on, and his work was looking at how people get jobs. And what he was hypothesizing is that we get jobs from people we know. Not that innovative, but what he found was that we don't really get jobs from people who are in our strong tie networks. We get jobs from these people in the other subnetworks because they know things we don't know about. So he was one of the first ones to start talking about the advantages of diversifying your network and connecting to people not like you. And so what's really amazing is this is what drives us today. This is what makes funders want to fund us. This is what makes legislators believe in networks, and why we're all crazy about it is because I think collectively we see this. We see that if we kind of reach outside of our comfortable known boundaries and reach across boundaries, we start to understand that there's things we don't know. And so the collaborative advantage of networking is really here, but this is also chaotic, right? So now put yourself back in you at work. and you want to go home at the end of the day, right? And you don't want to be networking all the time. So as an individual, we kind of lead crazy, lives like this at choice. But at work, we really need to think about how do we engage our community and organizations that have limited budgets. So there's some alternatives to this. This is another view of this network, which says, okay, what if we could connect to each of these sub-networks, but only connect to people who were really trusted and they're connected to a lot of others? What if we reduced redundancy and got rid of all these extra connections and just started to connect through fewer connections in that way? We could create new relationships with new sub-networks. What's really neat about this is that it allows us to think about how to build more diverse reach and breadth across our networks without having to necessarily build more ties. There's a guy named Ron Burt from business, and he really loved this. He calls these structural holes. He loved the strength of weak ties idea, but this allows us to really think about how we can connect to networks with fewer ties in a more efficient way. And this makes sense because imagine that your funder or whoever it is that is expecting you to build a network comes to you and says, we need, a 3-month, a 6-month update. In the beginning, almost all networks work like this, where they're pretty busy building connections. But imagine if you could say to that funder that over time, you started to build a strategic, very intentional way of working with people that's going to allow you to have fewer connections, but keep that same collaborative advantage. And there's a lot of reasons, I'm going to show you in one more slide, why this is really important to your sustainability. And I personally do this all the time when I meet new groups. Like, for example, we know Caroline now. I certainly won't be emailing this entire group. I might find Carolyn as my main node here to connect me to everyone else. But really that if I want to stay connected to you all, I do that kind of work in making sure that my connections are limited because we're so busy. I'm a mom. I have all those things going on. So building strong ties and good ties is important to me, but reducing them is a strategy I'm using in just my everyday life. So we really believe that you can manage relationships to create a network strategy. And I heard a lot of you say right now that you're trying to figure out how to, make this opportunity, really advantageous for people, but without overwhelming people, making sure the right folks are there and that you're inclusive and all these things. And we would say, well, make sure you have a network strategy, that you're not leaving it to chance. And just because we're human, it's like human nature, we connect. But we also really believe that you need data to do that because it's really difficult to do this all in an intuitive way. So I'm going to just do 2 more quick slides and then tell you a story. But this slide here, I hope that you'll see yourself in it somewhere. You'll see we call this a life cycle of a sustainable network. The idea of this slide is really to help us see where we can move through phases. So what's interesting, if all of you could look here in the middle and see these squares and circles and where they're laid out, what you'll start to notice if you look at the other pictures is that each picture has the same nodes in the same spot, but what's different are the lines between them. So that just from the beginning here, let's imagine these are organizations, and what we can see is that a group of organizations can be connected in very different ways. But what we've seen, and the reason we call this a life cycle of a sustainable network, is we've evaluated hundreds of networks, and what we've been able to see is that these networks change. Their ability to stay sustainable depends on a couple of things. So hey, I just noticed John's hand is raised. So why don't I actually break and see if you have a question, John? I'd love to hear it.
Sorry, and I can save it till the end if it's better.
No, go ahead.
It was kind of going to the last slide. Sorry, I'm curious, like in your example, who's me, is the individual that's connecting with the other networks. How do you manage within like that strong tie network, like that trusting relationship, like if I was one of the dots not making those connections?
You mean if you were maybe one of these dots?
Yeah.
So the way I like to think about this, like I'll just pull out an example, but let's say this is you and you're doing some community health work, and you need access to a hard to reach population. And here is this hard to reach population. There's often like a gatekeeper or a trusted person in that neighborhood, for example, that you might want to become close to, so that when we call it like activating the network, when you're ready to activate all these other ties, that person can help you get entry to that. We don't assume that you wouldn't be connecting to these people, especially during that kind of relationship building. What we're suggesting is that you don't have to maintain frequent interaction with all of these other kinds of folks to maintain a good relationship with that sub network. So we do, I don't know if it's a separate question, like how do you know who is the most trusted? We can tell you how we try to figure that out, but a lot of it just takes time, right, to understand that. And sometimes this person goes away and then you have to replace them with one of the others. So we don't believe that you can take away human relationship building, but that you can do it with more intention. We see the same things happening. For example, let's say you're really interested in connecting with a certain legislator is trying to pass some certain policy, but they're hard to get meetings with, but their staff may not be. So you may get a trusted tie with a staff member so that when you need to activate that, you can go and activate it with the rest of them. Does that even answer your question?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to explore that in further detail, but I think that would be a tangent for today.
Okay, I love those tangents, but yeah, let's save it for a little bit and see if we get to it. And if not, then we can always follow up. But I love, we love to measure hard to measure things. So the harder the question, kind of the better it is for us. We like to work on those projects. Okay, so going back to this, I'll imagine, so we have found this, kind of phases that community networks go through. So what we found that almost every community network starts in phase 1, where let's say you get funding or a legislator or someone says, we'd like to build a new early childhood council. And they come up and what almost the first thing they always do is list who's not already participating or who's not at the table. It happens every time. And then very quickly we move to phase 2, where those people are now invited to engage in one way or another. And that's very natural. That's network building. And then if you go down here to phase 3, you're going to see this is where the strategy is to grow the network. So you'll see lots of connections, lots of activities. And this is where about 95% of networks that exist are. And they stay there and they don't really have a strategy besides growing the network. And what happens though is people start to get overwhelmed or they start to disengage. They're not really sure what their role is. One organization or two tend to start taking it over and in terms of the work and people depend on them. So you start to get the free rider problem. And we find a lot of networks really struggling in this phase to be sustainable and to really continue on because it takes a lot of resources to maintain a network like this. So if you go to phase 4 over here, this is just an example. There could be lots of types of phase 4s, but imagine that this group has now decided on four strategies, let's say 4 problems they want to solve. They've created 4 work groups. Maybe they've identified 4 leaders who can lead each one, and maybe they meet quite frequently, but these work groups might meet, weekly, monthly, quarterly, even yearly, whatever they need. But most people in this group will have a role and they'll be invited to come to engage when they're going to play that role. And so that helps people know to say yes when they're invited and helps them understand when they don't have to come to, every monthly meeting where they might not have a role. And what we have found is that when networks can move from phase 3 to phase 4, and with this kind of intentional strategy in mind, they sustain longer. And what's really exciting about that is, once funding goes away, and I'm so sorry, I'm not remembering who said what on the intros by name, but someone mentioned how after 5 years, you're still justifying, the ACHs. There's times when what we're hoping is that we can maintain that collaborative advantage, but with fewer resources. So some kind of intention with these people involved that tells them, we're not trying to increase the amount of time you're engaging with us. We're actually trying to decrease it because now we have trust and we understand some roles that we're playing. And now we can do it less often, but we want to have the same outcome. If you think of like your family ties and our close ties, we probably engage with those people much less than a lot of others, but the trust with them is really high and our engagement with them is very natural. So that happens over time, and we see networks that get to that place. And so we've been really working with some networks on if this is true or not. But watching networks get to a better place when they build an intentional network strategy that's data driven. So we'll talk just a little bit more about that, and I want to open it to questions, but I'm going to end this section with this little story. I try to kind of go from like really theoretical to like now we're into real life, but this is a real life example, and I love to present it because it's not very academic. So this is an example of my own personal network, and I kind of want to show you how network science works in everyday thinking in real life. This is an example of planning a wedding. So in this example, this is actually a slide of the people who came to my wedding 14 years ago. And as we were planning that wedding, we were doing all the work of all the things you have to do to get ready for a wedding. And one of them was where people are going to sit. And so for my wedding, because I'm a big network geek, I was like, there's a couple of hypotheses here that we need to think about. One is, should we seat people together because they know each other and they'll love sitting together? So let's group people that way. Or do, the other hypothesis, do we want to seat people together who don't know each other because they're our friends and they're going to love each other, right? Because we know we know who, might enjoy each other's company. We'll build a whole new network of friends around us. And then there was, single people wondering where to put them. So what I did is I said, well, let me put all of the people coming invited to our wedding into a network, data set, and I'll just code everyone by one connection to who they might be connected to. There's lots of other connections, and then I'll visualize it. So it's so much fun to use visualizations to try to make sense of things in the world. So I did that, and they're coded by colors, which I'll explain in a second. And you'll notice one thing I'll tell you is my husband and I were not in this map because then they'd all be connected to us, right? So we visualized it, and immediately I saw these patterns, and I was really excited because my planning brain was like, yay, I've got little 8 tops. I can just seat people in these ways, and it's a just done deal, right? But my network scientist brain said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I saw this group over here, which is all connected. It's called a component. And it's when everyone in a group is connected to at least one other person in that group. And you'll see that's what this side is over here, where over here, you're going to see these kind of like subgroups happening. Well, because I know what the colors mean, I know that this over here was my husband's all friends and family. And this it was the first time I realized everyone in his life knows each other and knows at least one other person. And so that was really interesting as you're about to, go into a wedding, a social contract with someone to learn something. This over here is my network, this is called a closed network. Mine is an open network where most of the people in my world don't actually know each other. So really different ways of seeing the world, I think, and seeing us as in each other's. And what we ended up doing, this got so overwhelming trying to kind of get, all of this put together. So we ended up just letting everyone sit wherever they wanted. And when they did that, then we took pictures later, and I was able to code that up and see where people naturally sit at a wedding. So the reason I like to bring this example up is because really, we're doing this every day. So network science can sound very academic, and we've got strength of weak ties and sociologists and stuff, but really you and I are doing network science all the time. We use it in our personal lives, and it's really important, I think, that we use it in the kind of work that you're doing so that we can really take some of these concepts and do this work with intention. So I'm hoping that by introducing some of these concepts, it gives you some tools to think about how you might approach some of the challenges that you brought up in your intros. So just as a summary of this section, and then I want to pause and see if there's any other questions. Some takeaways is that building and managing a network doesn't have to be left to chance. There really is a science to help guide you. You are already a network scientist and you use it every day. You can manage network relationships to develop a strategy, but I believe you need data to do it. More networking is not better networking. So it's a great message to take home to your community. You can identify redundancy and holes in your network, which are not bad things. They're good, and that can inform your strategy. And that this proven strategy for network sustainability is that everyone in the network has a role they understand, participation is only required when that role is needed and otherwise it's optional, and that the network has a stated goal that the end includes this strategy to use the fewest number of resources to reach the same collaborative advantages. And this is the kind of thing that we, have experienced over and over with communities, that when they can kind of move to this thinking and apply some of these, there are some really neat outcomes that we've seen. What I want to do is move to just a story of how we've used data in science, to kind of in a real world example. The last thing I want to do before I open it to questions, though, first is Kelly is going to put in the chat, if she hasn't already, an exercise. This is one that we often do. Sometimes we'll do it. We started to do it virtually during COVID. Sometimes we do it in person, but it's a little worksheet that's really helps you think about your personal networks. There's some instructions at the bottom, and it really helps you think about your strong ties, your weak ties, and then how they might be connected. We do this exercise with boards and thumbtacks and rubber bands also at lots of events. So we might be able to start doing those again soon. But the reason I wanted to bring this up to you all and give you that worksheet is that it's great if you want to think about how to talk to people about network science and these kinds of ways of looking, this lens to look at the world. There's some tools and just some fun activities as facilitators you could use. And just this last thing I'll show you is the prompt that we almost give everyone after they create it is, if you could make one intentional change, what would it be? And for some, it's building up ties, and for some, it's reducing them and reducing redundancies. But it's really fun to walk kind of through this and help people think of what it means to be intentional. So let me pause. I do have just the story at the end here, but let me pause and see if there's any other questions or any other follow-ups. Okay.
I have one quick, maybe not quick question. I am wondering, as before I saw your map of the wedding, I was thinking about this issue of networks that are a little bit more distant from more central networks or more interconnected networks. And I think about this issue of access and equity and inclusion. And I think what happens, because I think this is the way that people work naturally, right? But what you're saying is that there's intention behind, there can be intention behind this. There can be a strategic way to do this, and there can be data that supports this. So naturally what happens in a world such as ours, where because usually the central network in our world, and this is especially true of Okanagan County, we have a central network of people, and they all generally look the same, and they have the same backgrounds, and they come from the same general places. And then outside, or occasionally, there'll be like one or two different, people with different backgrounds occasionally. And somehow they made it into the main network. But most of the time, what happens is that connections to the outer networks that we would really need when we think about issues like inclusion and diversity, those die out naturally, right? Yeah. And because the strength between those relationships is weak, one, and two, because once people from outside of the network enter into a network, there is a definite sense of network, right? Like there is a feeling of network and inclusion in an already established network. So this is not necessarily a question for VNL, but maybe everybody more generally about reflecting about what that looks like. What does it look like to be, you can be intentional and data-driven and strategic about inclusion, but there are just network problems. And so it just kind of maybe that's just like a reflective question to think about and leave with. Maybe not a discussion question for today, but just something I was pondering.
That's an awesome, meaty question, Michelle.
Yeah.
And the North Sound team, I know you've done a lot of work around equity, so feel free to chime in. I know I said you were flies on the wall, but please participate as well. Anybody have any kind of gut responses to what Michelle just raised?
It is a
Michelle.
meaty one. So I like.
I have some, but
fully-
I didn't want, I want to see if, John, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I don't know if when you were originally talking, I don't know if I was gravitating the same direction as you, but it made me kind of think that, like, even in the realm of equity, people tend to band together in belief systems, kind of like what you originally saying into the networks. So we tend to be in networks with similar beliefs, similar values, similar backgrounds, and then we're not connected to those other groups that are different, and that it's actually hard. That's a immediate question. It's hard to figure out how to make those connections and bridge those gaps because of some of those differences and understanding. And then you end up creating these separate networks who feed on each other in ways and beliefs that, isn't beneficial to the whole.
Danielle, is there a way to measure, I know that when doing equity work, sometimes you do power mapping to see who has access to power, like, and power, we also need to define that, but like there's power differentials too, which I think is a little bit of what you were alluding to, Michelle, in terms of like the established networks, and then the folks on the periphery who may not feel like they belong to the established networks. How does power mapping fit into network mapping and network measurement?
Well, yeah, actually, it's the thing I was going to bring up. We have ways that we've really tried to understand measuring this kind of stuff. And this is one of the harder to measure ones. But when we asked people years ago, when we started doing this work, like, why do you engage in these? What incentivizes you to come to this network? And a lot of people talked about the value, that they would speak of value in partnerships. So then we asked people to speak at length about what was valuable to them. And we found these kind of like top 3 areas that people talked about. And one was power and influence, that someone would have power and influence. But the other 2 that rose pretty high, as high, was that someone or an organization would have time and commitment to an issue. And the third one was a resource contribution. But what's been really interesting in terms of understanding that, we ask people in these networks to describe their perceptions of each other. And sometimes you'll find, like almost always in that first phase, when people invite the people who are not at the table, it's always a power and influence conversation. You cannot not start a network, right, with all the powerful and influential people there. It's just people do that. But what we have found is that they're also invited to like all the other networks, and these outlier type people who may have no power and influence, but a real time commitment or a real commitment to the issue or resources, are often not invited to either be a part of networks or lead networks. So one thing we've seen people do is really try to capture these perceptions and shift the leadership structure so that the same assumed, powerful and influential people are not also invited to lead every network, but some of these people with no power and influence and maybe no resources, but huge commitments, which are often, let's say, small nonprofits who have, very little resources, are invited not just to come and participate in the network, but asked to come and lead and be on the decision-making committees of networks. And we've seen a real push against inviting people to be inclusive, to speak, for example, at a network, and then, making a seat at the table for them in a more leadership or decision-making way. And I think so we've seen that. And the last thing I would say on this is, though, another thing we see that seems to really be, I think it causes a lot of inequities in communities, is that when a network gets started, there's an invitation often for people to come to the table. And if you have a funder behind it, everybody's asked, and everyone will say yes, because if you're not there, you're going to be left out. But there are organizations that have a lot of resources, and they have just more capacity, and they come to the table. But then those organizations that have no capacity and very little staff, little funding, they also come to the table, which means now everybody's spending spending the same amount of time in network building work. Although those communities that already have lower capacity are spending less time on their direct services because now they're spending more time on networks. And so we have to be very careful in how we compensate people for their time or think about the capacity of organizations that have no power and influence, who have few resources to be able to participate in these kinds of things. Because what we're asking them to do is take staff time away from their direct services. So if they say no or don't, clamor to come to our networks, it might be because they simply just don't have capacity to be there. So something we've written about this in how networks can be very harmful in communities around creating inequities of who gets a spot at the table because they just simply cannot come and spend that time in network building. Those are two ways we've thought a lot about it at VNL.
Liz, did you have a question or a comment in this space? I see your hands raised.
I probably have a comment. And I think, Michelle, if I was hearing your comment and question, one of the things that we're really, at about a C+. So, but we're intentional about it in North Sound. We aren't always the inviter. I mean, we think of our network as sometimes we're in a network that belongs to the Latinx community. And it's because they've invited us for some reason to be a part of that. We're not forming a network that invites the Latinx community to a table. And so, trying to find a way where, whether it's, we have 8 tribes in our region, there are tables where the tribes are doing planning, where we are there as a guest, we're there to learn, we're building relationship. And all I can say is that the intentionality about commitment to those relationships pays off with future tables. And so, I think that we have to be conscious around this network stuff when we, just a reflection. When we talk about our networks, they're not always our networks. Sometimes we're invited, sometimes we're inviting. And that if we're not conscious of that, we will continue to form tables that look exactly like the last table that we formed. If we want to get creative, if we want to see, a table of community health workers, I'm going to go to where community health workers gather. I'm going to build a relationship with them, and I'm going to see, gosh, will they invite me to some of their gatherings so that I can continue to support that work. And it is like having that type of dedicated time and intentionality, because that's not something you can do when you have free time. It's something that happens because you've got somebody on your team who's dedicated to like finding those relationships and cultivating them and fostering them. And so the slide that I was thinking about, Danielle, that you shared was like the stages of network building, that we might be at stage 4 with health systems, but at stage 2 with the Latinx community. And maybe like we never actually get to design stuff with state agencies because, their tables are kind of like flat archies or something. So, but just like being conscious that we're not all at the same place, but the intentionality and dedicated staff time, it has been worth that kind of investment to make those change over time.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. Thanks for the question, Michelle, or the thought. I have a little bit more to do here, but it's such a rich discussion. I want to make sure there's no other questions or.
I think one quick thing I'll add is that from the ACH perspective, what really got me thinking when I saw these network maps is this realization that, oh, actually, if we can measure who is out there, and we can measure who we're not connected with, whether we're a part of their network or they're a part of ours. And I think that's been what's been a bit paralyzing, is this invisibility of the true network, right? We have the network we know, the network we're building, but that's just what we know. And there's a lot we don't know that I feel confident is necessary to improving the health of our communities, and a lot of partners that are not currently engaged, like we're not engaged with them, they're not engaged with us. And so realizing that there's a way to harvest that information and see the map and then be strategic is what got me super excited about this science, this practice. And I think it just goes to this intentionality. So like we actually have tools to be intentional, not just will to be intentional. And that's what gets me excited about this. And I'll just say that for all of you on this webinar, so I don't forget to say this, like if you're interested in more than today's 101 session, and if you feel like you found something you really think could help you in your work, reach out to me, because we're planning on digging into this as an ACH, and we welcome any other network partners as we explore how to be more strategic. So Michelle, I see your hand. I don't know if that's like you want in or you have a question, but yeah, in the chat, feel free to say or email me. You know how to find me.
I just wanted to just connect your two comments, Carolyn and Liz, about the missing tables, right? Like our table, there are other tables, and we need to, but really, and then devoting people and resources to knowing all the tables, right? And really that needs to be, it can't be, just a like, oh, come here, people. It is devoting time and knowing other tables, which is also hard. You don't know what you don't know. So yeah.
This is like a perfect segue to an example, because I think the question that then comes up is like, okay, then how? How do we do what we just said would be great to do? So this will take just a few minutes. I just really like to make this really real. So I'll finish with this, if that's okay, Carolyn. Yeah, okay.
Of course. It's your show.
Okay, so because I want to make sure that you have a how, and an example. I don't like it to leave it too abstract. So what I want to do here, and it's really a story. So I am going to talk about an application of this, but it's not to be like presenting p-values and all this kind of statistics. I want to describe almost like the process. And this is a long timeline, but in a very short explanation. But many years ago, I met a woman named Dr. Ayelet Talmi, and she came to me and said, look, we are trying to work on improving the system of care for babies and young children with special healthcare and developmental needs in Colorado. And we have a network. We have a partnership called Wonder Babies. And she said, I feel like if we could visualize this, if we could understand this better, we could do a better job at building that system. So this is the problem, of course, for these families, is that when you have a child, it's hard. And when you have a child with special needs or special healthcare needs, it's even harder. And so this is a picture from a mom who was drawing all of the types of, people and organizations in healthcare that she was interacting with. And you can just see it's just very hard to navigate. True for so many different of our populations. So what we did is we used what we have built, which is called Partner. It's a platform that lets us collect this kind of data. It actually stands for the Program to Analyze, Record, and Track Networks to Enhance Relationships. That is exactly what it does. So we really like the acronym. But basically it uses what everything I've been talking about is a method called social network analysis. So social network analysis collects data on who's connected to whom, how those connections vary and change, focusing on patterns over the relationships and looking at the types and qualities of those connections. So I explained, that in some examples, but I wanted to make sure you had some tool here for if you wanted to move forward on how to actually collect that kind of information and measure it and visualize it. And some background on Partner, it was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for 7 years. It's been used actually in over about 6,000 communities now. The slide's older. And it's just across public health and health systems and all kinds of different use cases, but people trying to do exactly what you're talking about to get information and visualize. And that's, all the things I've talked about that we can do with that kind of information, including understanding trust and value and things like that, are possible. So back to Wonder Babies, we went ahead and applied this method and this tool, and this was the final network map we got. So what we did is we asked the 12 Wonder Babies partners to tell us who was involved in the system of care for babies and young children in Colorado, and they told us who they were involved with, and we asked them to answer questions about how they are providing services or referring clients and coordinating care for families. And this is what we got. This is kind of geographically situated, where the inner circle is the Denver metro area. Not on purpose, it's just that there is more activity there. So the periphery tends to be more of our rural communities. But, and this is helpful, but what we did is Ayala and I said, let's take this data back to the community and ask them how it can help them work on their systems. And so our main goal was translating the data back to practice. One group asked us, can you point out where all the mental health agencies are? Because we want to know how they're embedded in the system. So the blue nodes there are all the mental health agencies across the state. If I took out the yellow nodes, we would not see a lot of connections between them, but geographically they're well laid out. And so the question, knowing more is not better, was, do we need better coordination across these mental health agencies and so forth? So we were able to use the data that way. Counties started asking us to break out the data. So on the left, you'll see Tri-County data, which is one of our most urban, busy counties, lots of connections. On the right, you'll see Wells County, which is a very rural county, not even totally connected within their own small rural county. Actually, very unusual. Rural counties tend to be highly connected because of their rural natures. But we started to see some breakdown of the system and some really good use cases of the data. We'd also do this exercise that I mentioned, where we'd go to a community and we would say, hey, on this board, can you map out what would be your ideal system of care for families? And they would, and people liked doing this. And we would use that information to help people think about where they are to where they want to be and how to get there. But then we went to families and we said, hey, families, how can you use this data? And the families who interacted in these exercises were like, we hate this data. I mean, they were like, this is not at all what I see when I think of my world for my kids or me or my family. And this is not how and they were like, we don't care what you all are doing. What they really said to us is, when I need help, I go to my friends and family in my church, my neighbors. And when I can't get help from my informal supports, I go to those systems resources, but I don't want to. And when I do, I just want to know who to call and how to get there. I don't want to have to know the whole system. So we realized real quickly, and all of that took a few years. And then we said, wait a minute, we might be looking at a system, a well-functioning system, totally wrong, because we are thinking that the system is the outcome. So what if we started just asking, how do families in this case navigate those systems? And what is it about their personal support networks that either enable them to do that better or have a harder time with that? So this is a picture. So what we started to do is that's when we started to ask families to draw pictures of their social support networks. And so we just scrapped everything and started having pictures drawn. This is a mother of twins with special healthcare needs who showed us that like her go-to are in the circles, which are her informal supports, and everyone in a square box was her more formal support systems. And then we started doing surveys with families to try to understand their social support networks. We started seeing really different things. The map on the left are all the systems supports. The map on the right was the family's view. And you'll see like the main nodes are not a bunch of acronyms. They're like friends, schools, family. So what we started to learn right away is the perceptions of what is a good high functioning system from family perspective and from provider perspective is very different. So we said, okay, what we found was that families have a preference for tapping into their informal supports for help first, and then they'll use the systems when that's not enough. And that people want to help themselves. They all expressed, and we would too. I want to help myself and my family before I get referred to a system. And yet much of our systems building work is about building a great system and referring people into it. So we took all that information and said, that's great, but how do we use this to help people? And we started asking, why are we expecting people to fit into these systems? And why don't we expect these systems to fit around people and be adaptable? So then we started to say, look, let's just say a high functioning system system is coordinated when 100% of the families say they can navigate it, not when we think the system is navigable. I don't know if I said that right. But we knew that first we had to better understand these personal support networks and then build an adaptive system around them. So I used to always end talks and say, one day I'm going to build a tool that allow us to track that kind of personal support network so that providers could use it in people's care. And luckily we got invited into the Community First Foundation's Innovator Society, and we started building what we call Partner Me. I'll show you what this is. It's really neat. We're really excited about it, but it's a tool. We call it a person-centered network tool, and it's our way of helping providers, counselors, social workers, care coordinators track and understand who is at risk of adverse social connectedness and who's at less risk, and then help them use that information to identify their most pressing need with the least amount of social support so that we can refer them to resources. And I'll show you how something like that works. There's a screener that people use, and they can ask any kinds of questions. These are really generic questions. We actually won the Prime Health Innovation Challenge in November last year, and these are slides from that. But we ask people often things like, how do you rate your own health, or how often do you feel lonely or isolated? But we'll ask people also, who do you rely on when you have problems? And people will list others. And then we'll ask them, like, with their finger or their mouse. So it's very interactive. A map like this pops up to tell us who of these people can coordinate care for them when they need help, or for their children. So what we get really quickly is a really a perception from that person on whether they are embedded in a coordinated network of care or not. So we are asking them to help us understand that their perception of their network. Then we ask them things like their social determinants of health. What are their most pressing concerns? And they'll list them. This list changes depending on who's using this. So if it's a mental behavioral health center, it looks very different from a pediatric care, clinic. We take the answers to that question and the other question, and we turn it into another picture for them. And we ask them a really important question. We say, well, who helps you with these things that you need? We found this to be really important because what happens today is people are screened on their needs. And if Kelly told me childcare, food, work, and transportation were her needs, she often gets 4 referrals to these places. And it's pretty overwhelming for a person, and then they're expected to go find them. What we do is we ask, who helps you with the things you need, because we learned that people want to help themselves. So this whole tool has a philosophy. It's a strengths-based approach that believes that people want to take care of themselves. And if we engage them in a conversation about how they are doing that and acknowledge and honor where they're good at that, they actually become more receptive to getting help from the system. So in a case like this, we might look at this map and say, Kelly, looks like you're doing a great job at getting childcare help from some friends and family, and also help with food, but no one's helping you with work. So let's start there. So what we do is we find a person's most pressing need with their least amount of social support. We also ask them, to what degree do you trust these people to help you, and what degree do you depend on them to help you? And then we turn all of that into these reports, and these reports help a provider see when a person is maybe connected to a lot of others, but they're at risk of adverse social connectedness because those people they're connected to, they're highly dependent on, but they don't trust them to help them when they need it. And so when we can find a person who has that level of combination of characteristics, we know that person might need more systems help than someone even who looks a little more isolated, but has very trusted ties and low dependency. And we take all of that stuff and we can benchmark it. We have a lot of providers or schools and types of places that use it to look at scores. And then, of course, following them through connection to resources is really important. So our users just put in their own resource list or connect to their own preferred resource directory. So if it's a 211 or Unite Us, most people actually have like a binder of resources. But we take that visual and the way we connect it back. So this is what we've done with all that learning from Wonder Babies. We take those images of each individual family, each patient, and we drop it into our whole network maps so that we can see where people's needs are, who has common needs, and how they're getting connected to resources in our community. And then we take that information and look at it at a population level. So from a systems perspective, we can break it down by different characteristics in the population, different needs, 18 to 24-year-old females, and so forth. And it's been really amazing to watch that kind of analytics, social connectedness be incorporated into health and wellness care conversations, and the outcomes that we're hoping to continue to see when we incorporate discussions of social connectedness into people's healthcare. And we use it with kids. We have this line of work with the NCACH Foundation where their kids are using it to kind of have like almost a new voice for their mental behavioral health needs and being able to talk about the things they need and the people in their lives. And this is actually my daughter who presents with me sometimes. And it's been really fun to kind of watch new ways of measuring hard things and thinking about these network science concepts in our work. So that's it. But the thing I always like to say at the end is what I would encourage you all to do is not take our example, not take even our tools, but like if what we've done is we are constantly thinking, how can we use this network science, some of these core concepts to answer these complex problems that we're trying to solve. And it really puts it's been opening our minds to new solutions and ways of navigating those challenges. So I hope that is something that you all might get to take away from this as a way to be able to use these as tools in your work, in your communities. So I know we only have a few minutes, but open to questions.
And there's so much going on in my head right now. And I love the way network science can be applied at the individual level for members of our community who need help, and the recognition that they have agency and we need to follow, it needs to be person-centered. And I coordinate our community-based care coordination project, and that sounds very amorphous. Sometimes it feels that way. But I would say that a lot of what you shared today for me resonates with that community-based care coordination context, with care coordination in general, which is something that all of our partners have been working on. But so I'm just interested in how do we apply this at a systems level, community level, individual level, and how can we keep iterating between those levels to improve health? I don't know. I'm gonna need to digest this more. I wish we had more time to see if everyone had any reflections or takeaways. And anybody else want to share anything?
Yeah,
Caroline, Liz, go for it.
Yeah, no, Caroline, I was just going to say that I could certainly imagine that our team would be really interested in continuing to explore this with you. So just keep us in mind.
Sounds good. And I can promise that I will continue to explore this. Like, I have ideas. I would love our ACH to invest in this tool, both for us as an ACH and for our partners, and for us to get a picture of the data, not just for ourselves, but like you were saying, Danielle, to take it back to communities and say, how can this data help you, right? So Michelle and Kelsey, I'm thinking of CHIDES, right? You're a sub-network of our larger network. You're dealing with these dynamics at a different scale. So that's the other thing that's really cool about thinking as a network scientist, is you're dealing with repeating patterns and barriers at different scales. And we all are at a certain scale, and we just need to like focus on that, but stay connected. Anyway, so you'll definitely be hearing from me. Anybody on this webinar is welcome to reach out to me if you want to explore anything. Yeah, I think you've given us a lot of great food for thought.
Yeah. Well, we've had a couple of ACHs reach out, especially recently, and we're just amazed at your ability to innovate. I mean, that when we have these conversations with you all, and I know you said in the beginning, like we're wary of vendors and things like that. So I feel like all of our roots are in the nonprofit and education sector, but I'm proud of what we've done. And we have this like all-female network scientist team, and our in-house developers and stuff. But we all roll out of bed in the morning and are like, we're gonna solve social connectedness, in communities. So we love opportunities to work with groups like yours. So look forward to any further conversations.
Awesome. Very appreciative for what you shared today. And Kelly, thanks for recording it so we can share it with others. And with that, I guess everybody have a
Okay.
good rest of your day. Stay safe. Go have lunch.
Thank
To
you
be
so much.
continued.
Nice to meet everyone. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.